After the United States slammed hard on tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China, the economic landscape took a dramatic, unprecedented turn. In the immediate aftermath of these sweeping measures, retaliatory actions surged from all corners of the trading world. Canada and Mexico, in fierce response, quickly struck back with counter-tariffs aimed squarely at American industries. Yet while most nations were content to exchange blows in this high-stakes economic boxing match, China has taken the confrontation to a whole new level. Not only did Beijing respond, it escalated the conflict by imposing additional punishing tariffs on key Canadian agricultural and food products, signaling its refusal to back down. Chinese authorities announced that beginning March 20th, a 100% tariff will be levied on Canadian rapeseed oil, oil cakes, and peas, while a 25% tariff will apply to selected pork and aquatic products. These measures come on the heels of Canada's earlier tariff actions against Chinese imports, including a 100% levy on Chinese-made electric vehicles and 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum products. The Chinese Ministry of Finance and Commerce has defended its decision by arguing that Canada's measures were discriminatory and disrupted normal trade practices, prompting Beijing to resort to strong countermeasures in order to safeguard its domestic industries and assert its rights under international trade rules. The new tariffs target products that represent significant export sectors for Canada's agricultural industry. Canadian producers, particularly those in western provinces where rapeseed is a major crop, face the prospect of losing substantial market share in China, a country that has become one of Canada's largest buyers of agricultural commodities. Analysts estimate that these tariffs could jeopardize billions of dollars in export revenues, with Canadian rapeseed products, oil cakes, and peas being among the most vulnerable. At the same time, the 25% duty on pork and aquatic products is expected to add further strain on producers already grappling with fluctuating domestic demand and heightened global competition. While Beijing has opted to leave some products, such as Canadian canola, out of the immediate tariff list, a move that some observers interpret as leaving an opening for negotiation, the overall impact is predicted to be significant for Canadian exporters. According to reports by Business Insider, the timing of China's announcement appears to be carefully calibrated. The move comes as Canada is in a period of political transition, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau having announced his intention to resign, and the Liberal Party preparing to select a new leader. Analysts suggest that by imposing these tariffs now, China may be seeking to reset trade relations with Canada and send a clear signal not only to Ottawa but also to other nations that follow Western trade policies closely, including the United States. This strategic timing is seen as an effort to leverage the inherent uncertainties of political change in Canada to gain a stronger negotiating position in future trade talks. In parallel to these developments, AP News has provided further insights into the economic rationale behind China's actions. In its detailed report, AP News noted that the new tariffs are not isolated measures but rather an integrated part of a broader retaliatory strategy. According to the report, Chinese authorities conducted an anti-discrimination probe into Canada's tariffs on Chinese products, a probe that concluded Canada's actions had disrupted normal trade flows and unfairly targeted Chinese imports. As a result, Beijing has determined that imposing a 100% tariff on key agricultural products and a 25% tariff on certain food items is a justified and necessary countermeasure. The AP report underscores that these retaliatory tariffs are meant to protect China's domestic agricultural sectors, which are facing challenges from an influx of lower-cost Canadian products under the new trade environment. Beyond the immediate economic impact, the latest round of tariffs is also altering the strategic landscape of international trade. Canadian officials have expressed serious concerns about the long-term implications of Beijing's measures, which could force Canadian producers to seek alternative markets at less favorable terms. With China being a critical export destination for products like rapeseed oil and peas, any sustained decline in market access could have ripple effects across Canada's agricultural sector. Government spokespeople have indicated that Ottawa is closely monitoring the situation and is prepared to initiate discussions through the World Trade Organization, WTO, dispute settlement mechanism if necessary. The use of such multilateral channels, however, could be a lengthy process and may not provide immediate relief for industries already facing steep challenges. At the same time, the economic impact of the tariffs extends beyond Canada's agricultural exports. Analysts have drawn parallels with similar trade disputes around the world, noting that such retaliatory measures often lead to cascading effects. For instance, the tariffs imposed by China may prompt further protectionist measures from Canada and even the United States, potentially igniting a cycle of tit-for-tat actions that could disrupt global supply chains. In an interconnected global economy, these disruptions can lead to higher costs for consumers, reduced competitiveness for domestic industries, and increased uncertainty in international markets. Trade experts warn that while the immediate goal of the tariffs is to address perceived unfair trade practices, the broader consequences could include a more fragmented and less predictable trading system. In addition to these economic considerations, the political dimensions of the dispute are also significant. China's aggressive stance on trade matters has been accompanied by a clear political message. Nations that adopt protectionist measures against Chinese goods may themselves face punitive measures. This message is particularly directed at countries like Canada, which have been part of a broader Western alliance, advocating for tougher tariffs on Chinese products. By imposing these retaliatory tariffs, China is asserting its willingness to use its considerable market power to influence trade policies in its favor. At the same time, this approach reflects a growing trend where trade disputes are increasingly intertwined with geopolitical and ideological conflicts. As countries around the world navigate these challenging dynamics, the separation between economic policy and national security considerations is becoming ever more blurred. For Canada, the immediate challenge is to mitigate the damage to its export sectors while maintaining a principled stance on free trade and fair competition. In recent years, Canadian policymakers have emphasized the importance of diversifying export markets and reducing reliance on any single trading partner. However, given that China remains one of Canada's largest export markets, particularly for agricultural products, finding alternative buyers may not be a straightforward solution. Industry leaders have called on the Canadian government to engage in proactive diplomatic efforts and to consider targeted financial support measures for affected sectors. Such interventions, while necessary to protect jobs and livelihoods in the short term, may also raise concerns about market distortions and the long-term viability of protectionist policies. In this context, the role of international institutions such as the WTO becomes critically important. The WTO provides a framework for addressing trade disputes and for ensuring that tariff measures are implemented in accordance with international rules. Canadian officials have already signaled their intention to challenge China's retaliatory tariffs through the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, arguing that the measures violate key principles of non-discrimination and fair trade. However, resolving such disputes through multilateral channels can be a protracted process, and there is no guarantee that the outcome will be favorable to Canada. Moreover, the political pressures on both sides, exacerbated by domestic concerns and the broader global trade environment, mean that any resolution is likely to be part of a larger negotiation process involving multiple stakeholders. Another layer of complexity arises from the fact that these tariff measures are occurring against the backdrop of other ongoing trade disputes involving major economies such as the United States and the European Union. In recent years, the global trade system has seen a rise in protectionist measures, with tariffs being used as a tool to achieve various economic and political objectives. For instance, the United States under President Trump has imposed a series of tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, and China, citing national security concerns and the need to protect domestic industries. These measures in turn have prompted retaliatory actions from the affected countries, creating a cycle of escalating trade tensions. While the current dispute between China and Canada is distinct in its focus on agricultural products, it is also part of this larger pattern of protectionism that is reshaping the global trade landscape. The implications for the global economy are significant. As nations adopt more aggressive tariff measures, the risk of trade wars increases. Trade wars characterized by escalating tariffs and counter-tariffs can have deleterious effects on economic growth by disrupting supply chains, reducing investment, and increasing uncertainty for businesses and consumers alike. In the worst-case scenario, prolonged trade disputes could lead to a fragmentation of the global trading system, with countries forming exclusive blocs and engaging in bilateral rather than multilateral trade agreements. Such a development would not only undermine the rules-based international order that has governed trade since the end of World War II, but could also lead to higher prices and reduced economic efficiency on a global scale. For China, the decision to impose these tariffs is driven by a combination of economic and strategic considerations. On the economic front, Chinese authorities argue that Canada's tariffs on Chinese products have created an uneven playing field, harming Chinese exporters and disrupting normal trade flows. By imposing retaliatory tariffs on key Canadian exports, China aims to restore balance and protect its domestic industries. Strategically, the move is intended to serve as a warning to other countries that adopt similar protectionist measures. China's government has made it clear that it is prepared to use its market leverage to defend its interests, and that countries which undermine China's economic policies may themselves face punitive measures. This stance is part of a broader effort by Beijing to assert its influence in the global trade arena and to challenge what it views as unfair practices by its trading partners. Amid these high-stakes negotiations, the voices of industry stakeholders and economists add further nuance to the picture. Canadian agricultural producers, already facing pressures from domestic market fluctuations and climate-related challenges, now find themselves caught in the crossfire of international trade disputes. Many farmers and exporters have expressed concern that the new tariffs will force them to lower their prices or seek alternative markets, both of which could reduce their profitability and increase uncertainty in an already volatile market. Some analysts argue that while the immediate impact of the tariffs may be painful for Canadian producers, the long-term effects could also include a realignment of global supply chains. In response, industry groups are calling for the Canadian government to implement targeted support measures, such as temporary subsidies or low-interest loans, to help affected sectors transition to new markets. On the diplomatic front, the dispute has added further strain to Canada-China relations, which have been complicated by previous issues such as the detention of Canadian citizens and long-standing disagreements over human rights and cybersecurity. While the current tariff dispute is primarily an economic issue, it is likely to have political repercussions as well. Canadian officials have reiterated their commitment to free trade and open markets, even as they take steps to protect domestic industries. At the same time, they are engaging in diplomatic outreach to both China and international trade bodies in an effort to resolve the dispute through dialogue and negotiation rather than through unilateral measures. Beijing, for its part, insists that its actions are justified and that Canada must abide by international trade rules. The Chinese government has signaled its willingness to engage in further talks, but it has also warned that it will not back down from measures designed to protect its economic interests. Observers note that the current dispute could have broader implications for other trade relationships. For example, the tension between China and Canada may influence how other countries approach trade with both nations. Countries in Asia, Europe, and even the United States are closely watching the developments, as they may be forced to navigate similar challenges if protectionist measures become more widespread. Some experts caution that if the current dispute escalates, it could trigger a domino effect, leading to further tariff hikes and a retrenchment of global trade. Others remain cautiously optimistic that negotiations can eventually yield a compromise that protects the interests of both sides without causing undue disruption to global markets. Moreover, the economic ramifications of the tariff dispute are not limited to the sectors directly affected by the new measures. Higher tariffs on key agricultural products could lead to increased costs for food manufacturers and processors, which in turn could translate into higher prices for consumers. In an era of already rising food costs and inflationary pressures, such additional burdens may have significant social and political consequences. Governments on both sides of the dispute are aware of these risks, and there is considerable pressure to find a resolution that minimizes the negative impact on consumers while still addressing the underlying trade imbalances. At the same time, the dispute highlights the challenges of managing an increasingly multipolar global trade system. While the post-World War II era was characterized by relatively stable trade relationships and the dominance of multilateral institutions such as the WTO, the current environment is marked by rapid changes in technology, geopolitical rivalries, and shifting alliances. In this context, trade disputes like the one between China and Canada are becoming more common, as nations use tariffs not only as economic tools but also as instruments of foreign policy. The current situation underscores the need for robust international frameworks that can mediate such disputes and ensure that trade remains predictable and fair. Looking ahead, the resolution of the dispute will likely require a combination of diplomatic negotiations, legal challenges through the WTO, and domestic policy adjustments on both sides. Canadian officials have expressed their willingness to engage in dialogue with Chinese counterparts, and there are indications that negotiations may begin soon. However, given the high stakes and the entrenched positions on both sides, a swift resolution is far from guaranteed. In the meantime, both countries must contend with the immediate economic fallout, which includes disrupted supply chains, uncertainty for businesses, and potential long-term shifts in trade patterns. The evolving nature of the dispute has also attracted the attention of economists and policy analysts around the world. Many experts view the situation as a case study in the complex interplay between economic policy and international diplomacy in the 21st century. They point out that while tariffs can serve as effective tools for protecting domestic industries, they also risk triggering retaliatory measures that can ultimately harm both sides. In the long run, the dispute may prompt countries to reconsider their reliance on unilateral tariff measures and instead seek more cooperative approaches to managing trade imbalances. Such approaches could include renegotiating existing trade agreements, strengthening multilateral institutions, or developing new mechanisms for resolving trade disputes outside of the traditional tariff framework. In summary, the imposition of fresh retaliatory tariffs by China on Canadian agricultural and food products marks a significant escalation in the ongoing trade dispute between the two countries. The tariffs, set to take effect on March 20th, 2025, target key Canadian exports such as rapeseed oil, oil cakes, peas, pork, and aquatic products, and are positioned as a direct response to Canada's earlier tariffs on Chinese goods. While Beijing argues that these measures are necessary to counter what it views as discriminatory trade practices, Canadian officials remain deeply concerned about the potential economic fallout. The dispute has already raised alarms about billions of dollars in export revenues at risk, and it underscores the broader challenges facing the global trading system as nations grapple with rising protectionism and shifting geopolitical alliances. As both China and Canada prepare for a period of intensified negotiations, industry leaders, policymakers, and international trade bodies will be watching closely to see how the dispute unfolds. The outcome will not only affect the immediate trade relationship between the two nations, but could also have far-reaching implications for global trade patterns and the rules-based international order. While there is cautious optimism that diplomatic channels and legal mechanisms, such as the WTO, can eventually provide a resolution, the current environment remains highly uncertain. In a world where economic policy is increasingly intertwined with geopolitical strategy, the dispute between China and Canada serves as a stark reminder of the complex challenges that lie ahead. As the situation continues to develop, both the immediate and long-term impacts of these tariffs will become clearer. Canadian exporters are already preparing for the possibility of reduced market access in China, while Chinese authorities remain steadfast in their determination to use tariffs as a means of protecting domestic industries and signaling their broader strategic intent. In this high-stakes environment, every new policy decision, every diplomatic exchange, and every market reaction contributes to the unfolding narrative of a global trade system in flux. The coming months and years will be critical in determining whether the current dispute can be resolved through negotiation and compromise, or whether it will set a precedent for further escalation in a world where economic interdependence and national sovereignty increasingly collide. Ultimately, the fresh round of tariffs imposed by China on Canadian agricultural and food products is a microcosm of the larger challenges facing international trade today. It is a story of economic interests clashing with political imperatives, of market forces pitted against strategic state policies, and of nations striving to assert their sovereignty in a rapidly changing global order. As countries around the world contend with similar issues, from the United States' own tariff disputes to the European Union's evolving trade policies, the need for clear, fair, and predictable rules in international trade has never been more apparent. Whether through multilateral negotiations, legal adjudication at the WTO, or bilateral diplomacy, the hope remains that a resolution can be found that preserves the benefits of open trade while addressing the legitimate concerns of all parties involved. In the meantime, the new Chinese tariffs stand as a potent reminder that in today's interconnected world, trade policy is never just about economics. It is also about power, influence, and the ability of nations to shape the rules of the game. As the dispute between China and Canada continues to unfold, its repercussions will be felt not only by the industries directly involved, but also by the broader global community, as the balance of economic power and the prospects for international cooperation hang in the balance.